Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I am Tony Gerdeman, here as always with Tom Orr. Tom, weather is good out again, but other than that, how are you doing?
Good. We actually have some stuff to talk about. I was not expecting to be talking a lot of basketball this week, but here we are. Lots of news.
Yeah, and I looking at everything that has happened this week, and it's not like a bunch of big things, but stuff that we do need to address. I mean, the biggest thing is John Beilein to the Cavs, but we'll get to that in a sec. I think the biggest news for the Buckeye basketball team, and first of all, welcome everybody to the show. Thank you for listening. Justice Suing, transferring from California to Ohio State. He'll sit out next season and then have 2 years of eligibility. He was a sophomore this past season and led Cal with about 14 points per game and 6 rebounds per game. And so he'll sit out this season, and then be eligible for the 2020-2021 season, which seems like forever away, but it'll eventually get here. The thing about Justice Suing, Tom, that I like, he's a 6'7" guy. He's 215 pounds. He can put the ball on the floor. He can shoot. He can do this and that. He's a versatile guy. In Chris Holtman's offense, he's a 3 or a 4, just based on the fact that they don't really have positions. They don't necessarily have a power forward. Your power forward is going to be a tall forward who can do this and do that. And Justice Suing can rebound, as we said. I see him, Tom, he'll come in and he will replace Andre Wesson. And I don't know if Andre Wesson is going to start next year. I think we assume he will. Maybe E.J. Liddell will, who is the incoming freshman this coming season, who is very similar to Justice Suing in that he's like a 6'7" guy who will play the 3 and the 4. But I see Suing coming in and not just replacing Andre Wesson, but in improving the talent there, improving that position. And him combined with E.J. Liddell and also Alonzo Gaffney, who's another incoming freshman 3-4 guy this year. Those three, Tom, I think give Ohio State a very talented front court. We don't know if Caleb Wesson will be the senior center on that team. But if he is, you've got a very talented and a versatile front court where you've got all of your 4s and all of your 5s can shoot. And then you still got a guy like Kyle Young who comes off the bench, or maybe he starts next year and is the grit guy, the glue guy. But Suing is going to make them better, and combining them with sophomore forwards is going to be probably Chris Holtman's best team, I would think.
Almost certainly, I think that gives him his best team, because you have not just depth, but veteran depth at that point, where you've got guys who have been there for, you're going to have potentially guys who are there, juniors and seniors who've been under basically their whole careers under Holtman at that point. And you've also got athletic guys at all of those spots. You don't have the big plodding 4 or
Andre Wesson. I mean, he's a swing guy. He's a 6'6" guy, but he's not a guy who's just explosive, and these guys are more explosive.
Yes. Yeah. You've got a lot of guys who can do a lot of stuff, and that's how Chris Holtman seems like he likes to play. He is not someone who wants to have a fixed 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a 5. It's just kind of positionless basketball is a term that we've heard him use before. So that's something that it gives them a lot of different looks they can give you. And, some of these guys may not pan out to the level that Holtman wants them to. And if not, or if someone gets in foul trouble, or if someone gets hurt, whatever it is, you have some options there. And it's not just plan A, and then after that, it gets ugly real fast. Because that's how it's been the first couple of years for him, where the top level talent's been pretty good. And then after that, it starts getting pretty scary pretty quickly. So for Suing to come in, this is really a win-win. First of all, he gets to play major college basketball after playing in the Pac-12 last year, so that's cool for him. And for Ohio State, you get a guy who, I mean, Holtman has talked about liking to bring in guys who have to sit out a year because that eliminates the expectation that, I'm not playing as much as I want to because you're coming in knowing you're not going to play that first year. So that's one thing that there's sort of a benefit there. But while he's doing that, while he's sitting the year out, he's learning the system. He's playing with his teammates. He's getting used to being at Ohio State. He's getting used to Holtman's style of play, all of that kind of stuff, so that when he does start, he's not really a first-year player on the team. He already knows what he's getting into. He fits. He knows where to expect his teammates to be, all of that kind of stuff. So he has a potential to really be able to hit the ground running when he does get to play.
Yeah, and we keep talking about the front court, and yet you've got the back court of, assuming DJ Carton returns for his second year, you've got him at point guard. You've got Dwayne Washington and Luther Muhammad as juniors, and Justin Arns as well. So it's going to be a very deep and more talented than we've seen in a while. More talented than I think even like the D'Angelo Russell teams, because that was mainly just D'Angelo Russell. I think while they may not be as good as the Thad Matta teams with Will Buford, John Diebler, Jared Sullinger, those types of teams, I think it's going to be pretty close. And we've already seen Holtman get the team he has now into the second round, and I can only imagine good things for them moving forward. And then speaking of moving forward, they also got a commitment from 2021 forward, moving forward. See, Tom, it's a play on words by using the exact same words.
I don't get it.
Yeah, just edit that part out. But Kalen Etzler committed to Ohio State. He's like the number 51 or 52 player, something like that, in the nation in the 2021 class. A 6'8" guy who is maybe 180 pounds, 190 pounds, who needs to add some weight, but he can handle the ball. He needs to get a lot stronger in terms of finishing and in terms of also just his jumper and connecting in traffic and hanging and needing to be stronger in order to make those shots a little easier. He is the nephew of former Buckeye point guard Doug Etzler. Tom, I don't know if you were following the Buckeyes when Etzler played. He was like he was supposed to be like the next Jay Burson. Didn't quite do that, but he did have a game against, I think, George Mason where he scored like 39 points, 38 points. And I think he held the OSU assist record for a while in terms of assists in a game with like 16, maybe in that same game. But that was a George Mason when they would be running like Loyola Marymount was and playing no defense. But so he is a legacy in that way. Tom, it's interesting to me that he's so highly ranked. I think he's like the number 14 power forward, and like I said, maybe the number 51 player or something like that. But really, the only major offer he has was Ohio State. I think Louisville was calling and talking to him. There's another school around that level, but no significant offers. And I don't know if that's just a product of college basketball. That's how it is like that, but he's also from a small town, Division IV state champ. So that gives you an idea of how big his school is not. It's just interesting to me that there, I should have his offers up. And there's, I don't know, maybe like Dartmouth and, schools like that, maybe smaller Ohio schools, Bowling Green, stuff like that, maybe. Just where I would expect more schools to come calling if you're a top 100 player.
Yeah, you would certainly think so. I wonder if it's because he's potentially a little more of a developmental player where, I mean, you went through some of the things he's got to maybe work on in his game, and he's clearly not at a point where, I mean, 6'8", 195 is where he's listed. So that's not a size that's going to work in the Big Ten. Now he's got a couple more years of high school to put on some weight and all of that. So that's not, that doesn't mean he's not there yet, but it's more projectable, and maybe teams are not necessarily interested in a project, or they want to see him, he's the equivalent of a, come in camp and see if you can earn an offer kind of prospect, like we see in football all the time.
Did you say trajectable?
If I did say trajectable, I definitely meant to say it because that would be the trajectory of his projection. So if I said projectable, that's what I meant to say. If I said trajectable, then I would like to trademark that because that is actually very clever.
It's pretty good. It's pretty good. So yeah, you must have said projectable. The other big basketball news, of course, is Michigan head coach John Beilein to the Cavs. Now, I was in my car this morning driving, running around, and I just heard a tease about the Cavs getting a new head coach, and then they went to commercial, and there's a bunch of noise going on in the car, so I didn't know who they were talking about, and then things got quiet, and I hear them saying John Beilein and the Cavs, and I was like, whoa, that's completely out of the blue, but I don't know, maybe it isn't. It's an opportunity to cash in big time. And if you fail, then you retire early and go cash your, 5-year deal, NBA head coach. You're talking 35, 40 million, maybe. I don't know what the exact contract status is on him, but it's going to be a lot. I was definitely surprised. I'm also kind of chuckling at all of the takes coming out from around the college basketball world about how John Beilein's the last honest man, and now he's gone, and now what's going to stop college basketball from just becoming a devil sport? And I really like John Beilein, and I like the way he gets the most out of his players, and I like the way he makes a lot of Michigan fans super mad because they're not always great in like December, but they're better in March. Then what does this do for Michigan moving forward? And I always enjoy the names that come out immediately, and it happens at Ohio State. You start at the top, like Billy Donovan or Brad Stevens, and then eventually the real names come out, and everybody's like, ah. But that's also the way they kind of felt about John Beilein. I don't know that anybody was like super, yeah, we got our guy. But I don't know, what did you think when you heard about it today?
I wasn't completely shocked just because you've heard his name mentioned in connection to other NBA jobs. And, I think there was always a little bit of a sense that he was at least potentially interested in making that leap. He is someone who has climbed the ladder from the absolute bottom. And if you go through, and I don't have his exact resume in front of me right now, but it was like high school coach to D3 coach to D2 coach to low D1 coach to kind of mid-major D1 coach to West Virginia to Michigan and now to the NBA. I mean, he didn't win a national championship at Michigan, but he got him real, real close a couple times. He got him into the championship game, I think the final twice. So that's about as high as you can go in the college game without actually winning a national championship. And then, if you want to challenge yourself, you want to see what you can do, that's the NBA is the next step. And like you said, I mean, what is he, 66, something like that? He's getting up there in years. So I saw a lot of people going, why would you go to the Cavs? The Cavs are a mess right now. It's like, well, we're recording this on Tuesday night. And by the time you hear this, you will know whether the Cavs have landed the number 1 draft pick or not. But at the time John Beilein signed on, they had as good a chance as anyone to get the number 1 overall draft pick, which would presumably be Zion Williamson. So that's why that Cavs job is appealing. And, he's not going to wait 4 more years to take an NBA job. So if you want to do it, do it. Make your leap, take your shot. I mean, it is as good a time as any. And I don't know. I don't have any idea what to expect from him as a pro coach, because sometimes that can be, the pro game and college game are different. And sometimes that leap can work out just fine. And sometimes it doesn't work at all. And I don't quite know what to expect with him. I think I would be more optimistic with him than other guys just because he never did it as a recruiter. He did it as just a development guy, a game plan guy. He's just got a great basketball mind. He wasn't just like a John Calipari where you're just gonna, I'm just gonna get my 5 guys and get my 5 top 25 overall players and, throw the ball out there and see how it goes. Beilein is obviously a much more, complete college coach, which seems like it should translate reasonably well to the pros, but you never know with something like that, with that kind of jump.
I'm always amazed at how he brings in players and I don't pay huge attention to college basketball recruiting, but he brings in guys that you've never heard of, I've never heard of, and then at the end of the season, he's got a freshman leaving early, and you're like, how? Because you don't see him, you don't see Michigan mentioned with Duke and North Carolina and Kentucky in these recruiting battles, and yet he's got guys that I should go back and see, like, are these top 100 guys? Are they top 200 guys where they get in there and I believe he makes them better. Whereas a lot of these guys come in and coaches use their talents. I believe he makes the players better. And that's why I think he will do well in Cleveland as long as LeBron doesn't come back, and because I'm a LeBron hater. That's why. But 12 years at Michigan, I would have never had thought that was 12 years that he's been there, but I think that's long enough for anybody, and sometimes more than long enough, and you just want something new. But I also think this is, for the college guys, a lot of times they don't want to end their coaching career without knowing if they could have done it in the NFL or the NBA. And maybe that's where he is right now, where it's like, this is my last chance because I'm not going to take another job after this. And I probably would have never taken another job after Michigan other than an opportunity like this. And if the Cavs get the number 1 pick, then we will know that once again, the lottery is fixed and totally fake, right?
Well, the best part is, no matter who wins the lottery, everyone's going to be screaming that it's fixed, because if it's the Cavs win, obviously it's rigged for them because they already got it with LeBron. And if the Knicks get it, obviously it's rigged because the NBA is rigged for the big market. So the wonderful thing about the draft lottery is there's a conspiracy theory for everything. Just wait to see which one you get to scream about.
I saw Bill Simmons tweet that if the Cavs get the number 1 pick, he's going to quit sports.
I believe that.
So now I'm definitely rooting.
Yeah, that is definitely true. That is definitely a thing that is going to happen.
I'm going to quit sports and just do podcasts about Game of Thrones.
There's a little bit of an end time on that podcast that it's coming up relatively soon. So that would be probably a real short release, short run series. But that's not the best time to be getting into that particular line of work. But it's still technically going on.
You do you, Bill. So we both independently came to this conclusion about Dan Gilbert going out and getting John Beilein, how it was very similar to George Steinbrenner when he was the owner of the Yankees, how he went and grabbed Drew Henson, Michigan quarterback, and the Yankees drafted him, I think, in the 3rd round because he dropped because he was going to play football. So the Yankees drafted him. He's an outstanding third baseman. And they gave him, I think, like 7 years, $17 million to leave the Michigan football program. And so his last season was 2000. He started 1 year at Michigan in 2000. George Steinbrenner basically pays him to come to the Yankees. And George Steinbrenner also happened to be a huge Ohio State booster. And I don't know if that's what got his name on Ohio Stadium on the band entrance door, if it was that $17 million or whatever he paid to Drew Henson, but it was money well spent because Drew Henson, watching him back then, and I went through back today and looked at his numbers. Now, he only threw for like 1,800 yards in 2000, but he had missed a few games. But to me, he was amazing, and I don't think Ohio State would have been able to stop him in 2001. And if he is there in 2001, I don't know that the rivalry, the Jim Tressel era, gets off to such a good start.
No, I think that if Drew Henson is there in 2001, then the Jim Tressel speech about 310 days, if they lose that year, that takes on a whole different look. And that, that's the whole, it's like the inverse of the what if John Cooper had beaten Michigan in 1990 or 1992, would that have swung things in the future and taken some of the pressure off? It's the inverse of that. Okay, Tressel comes out and says 310 days, and then Drew Henson leads Michigan to a win, and they get blown out up there, and then Jim Tressel's a laughing stock. Does 2002 happen the way it does? Maybe, maybe not. But just to give some idea of what that did to that Michigan team. I mean, you mentioned Henson just being kind of pedestrian numbers, and this is a era when Michigan was extremely conservative, not throwing the ball a whole lot. As a junior, 2000, he completed 60% of his passes, 16 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. Those are very good numbers. They replaced him because they didn't have him. They had to throw John Navarre in. You may remember John Navarre late in his career as being like, okay, not bad. John Navarre, as a sophomore in 2001, was not ready to be the starting quarterback. And instead of, they went from 60% completions under Henson in 2000, Navarre was 53%, 17 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. So instead of 16 and 4, it was 17 and 12. So that just completely undercut that 2001 Michigan team. And then in the Ohio State game that year, Navarre 21 for 47, 206 yards, 2 touchdowns, 4 picks. There's another what if Jonathan Wells doesn't get hurt late in the first half of that game. Maybe that turns into more of a runaway. But with Henson in there and not Navarre, that's a very different looking 2001 game. So of all the money that George Steinbrenner spent as the Yankees owner, that was probably some of the best ROI he got, even though Henson didn't really do anything as a baseball player.
So I think in 2001, C. Grant was still cornerback right then, and that would have been something that Drew Henson probably would have been able to better attack. And C. Grant was very good somehow as a corner. I believe it was that year, and then moved back to linebacker in 2002. But Henson his arm was awesome, and he seemed to me like the prototypical quarterback. What the quarterback should have been, was supposed to be back then. Kind of a John Elway, but didn't run as much as Elway, but was a guy that was just, I don't know, feared, or maybe that was just me at the time as a young guy, that I was blown away by him, much more so than any of the previous quarterbacks, including the guy who he would compete with in his first 2 years, Tom Brady. And we've got this list, Tom. And do you want to introduce this? I'm not sure exactly how you. Yeah.
We'll introduce this. This is from. We do listener emails at the end of the show, but this is from one of our favorite listeners, so we're going to do this at the beginning of the show. This is an email from Mike. He says, on your next podcast, I'd like to hear an in-depth discussion of what the following players have in common. Dave Wilson from Illinois, Scott Campbell from Purdue, Mike Hohensee from Minnesota, and Brian Cupido from Minnesota. Now, Gerd, you already know the answer to this because you saw this email. But listeners, try and think about what Brian Cupido, Dave Wilson, Scott Campbell, and Mike Hohensee all might have in common. We could play the Jeopardy music here, but that would be a trademark infringement. So the answer is they all threw for more yards versus Ohio State than Tom Brady did. Tom Brady had 375 for Michigan, 375 yards passing for Michigan in 1998 in the game that they lost at Ohio Stadium. That is the 14th most passing yards against Ohio State. But the most yards, Dave Wilson for Illinois in 1980 in a loss. This is a loss. 621 yards, 43 for 69, 621 yards, 6 touchdowns, 3 picks, and they lost. I said I saw this, and my first reaction, Gerd, was I really wish you and I were there and got to do a post-game podcast and take listener questions on after a game when Ohio State gives up 621 passing yards and 6 touchdowns in a win.
I don't even know how you give up that many yards. How is there time to do that back then? I blame it on terrible defensive backs, and I don't know any of the defensive backs who were there for the Buckeyes, but that's so bad. If you gave up over 500 yards, you should automatically lose. And we're talking about, it was almost still caveman football back then. So to give up 620 yards passing is what's the equivalent today, like 1,200 yards? I don't know what the growth rate is, but that's bad. And Scott Campbell from Purdue is number 2 with 516 yards. He's threw for the second most against Ohio State, and the next guy above him threw for over 100 yards more than that. And I'm looking at this list. Drew Brees, 455 yards in 2000, 4 interceptions in that game. Was that a win or a loss for Ohio State?
That was the year that Purdue went to the Rose Bowl. So that was the year that Ohio State was winning late, and Drew Brees hit Seth Morales. Seth Morales got open deep right at the end of the game. It was like, I don't remember, 60, 70-yard touchdown, like a long touchdown bomb down the middle right near the end of the game, and they lost, I don't know, 30-something to 20-something, maybe 31-28, 31-27, something like that.
The Devin Gardner game in 2013, 451 yards, where I had nothing but respect for him after that game because I think he was on a bad wheel, had a bad foot, was more accurate in that game. And breaking news, the New Orleans Pelicans have landed the number 1 pick. The Cavs are number 5. So John Beilein going back to Michigan. But Devin Gardner in that game, 451 yards, 32 of 45, 4 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. And the last pass of the game was the 2-point conversion that was intercepted by Tyvis Powell. But that dude gave it all in that game, and it was a shame to see him lose, eh?
That was such a bizarre game. That whole game, it was like Ohio State fell way behind at the beginning and came back and looked for all the world like they had taken control in the third quarter, and then they had that one fumble by Carlos Hyde, and it swung completely back again. That was, and they hadn't lost. That was the 23rd straight win, something like that, 24th straight win, and 24th straight win at the start of Urban Meyer's career, and they were favored to win by a pretty comfortable margin, and it got real scary for a while. But yeah, that's one that I think gets overlooked on the list of best opposing quarterback performances against Ohio State. I mean, and I don't know, maybe ding him a little bit because that Ohio State defense was so bad. But that was certainly, just in terms of numbers and just in terms of watching it, right up there with, you want to say Phillip Rivers from 2003 or any of those other great quarterback performances against Ohio State. That one is right up there in that conversation.
You mentioned the Phillip Rivers one. I think for the Buckeye fans who remember that, he would be up there. He's not on this list. So I wonder, maybe he was like 350, something like that. But that was, and maybe I should go back and watch that again, because I just remember that was another one where you leave having nothing but respect for that guy because he was getting hit. He was standing in the pocket. He was pinpointing everything. And that was one of the great games. And T.A. McClendon was great. And then the rematch in 2004 was such a downer compared to the 2003 game.
Yeah, the 2003 game was, I think that went to triple overtime, and in triple overtime, it got settled by a goal line stand on a 2-point conversion. Like that was one of the all-time great Ohio Stadium games. Phillip Rivers' line in that game, 36 for 52, 315 yards, 4 touchdowns, 2 picks. That's a pretty solid day of work. And it ended up 48, 46, 46, 44, something like that.
Getting back to Tom Brady, I never had he was never special to me in college, where he could have been like saying that he's going on to be the greatest quarterback of all time, and I believe he is, but he was no different to me than like Scott Dreisbach or John Navarre. Like, if you tell me those guys went and became the greatest, I would be as surprised as I was about Tom Brady, because he was fine. I mean, he was a Michigan quarterback who is pretty decent, pretty good. Sometimes can be really good. Other times not that great. But I never have, like, he was never in my personal book of, this guy is a killer, like, Phillip Rivers, or maybe like Ohio or Michigan fans have with like Troy Smith. But he was just a guy back then. And maybe, I was just out of, 98, I was a senior. And so I would have been paying attention, and no real, I was at the peak fandom as a Buckeye senior, and I barely, and maybe it's because I was in college drinking a lot at the time, but I really don't have much in my memory banks of, this guy is something special.
And I mean, at the time, Michigan fans all wanted Drew Henson to be the guy, because, and I know this all gets retconned by Michigan fans now, but I mean, Drew Henson was the hometown boy. He's from Brighton, Michigan, the two-sport star athlete. He was the 5-star prospect, and Brady came from California and wasn't as highly recruited. And it's the backup quarterback is always the most popular guy in the team, but I mean, when Tom Brady was in the game, it was like, where's Drew Henson? Why isn't Drew Henson playing? Drew Henson should be playing. And he left there, and he was a 6th round pick, like 202nd overall, something like that. And and now Scott Loeffler hangs his hat on the fact that he's the guy who developed Tom Brady. It's like, well, okay, you turned Tom Brady into a 6th round pick, so how great was that development job? Because it seems like most of the development happened after the draft, when he stopped being your responsibility. So Tom Brady's another great what if. What if he doesn't get a chance to play in the NFL because Drew Bledsoe doesn't get hurt? Because he only got a chance to play because Drew Bledsoe lacerated his spleen or something ridiculous like that during a game and got kind of thrown onto the field in the middle of the year.
I was going back and reading about Drew Henson, and I guess it would have been the 99 season where Lloyd Carr would start Tom Brady and then play Drew Henson in the second quarter, and then whoever played the best played the rest of the game. And it just seems like such a backwards way, not backwards, just it doesn't seem like a great way to do things. And eventually Tom Brady won out because he was, I guess, better at the time. But I will forever be shocked by how good he became. But it was also fun watching the Notre Dame fans latching on to Charlie Weiss, claiming that, like you said, Scott Loeffler hangs his hat on that. Notre Dame fans latched on to Charlie Weiss because Charlie Weiss, he was the reason Tom Brady was the greatest. And I don't know how long Charlie Weiss coached Tom. Charlie Weiss took over in 2004 at Notre Dame, or 2005. One of those two was his first year. So he had maybe 4 years with Tom Brady, and he turned him into, and he was solely responsible for making him the greatest quarterback of all time. And then it's just fun watching on the old internet back then how Notre Dame fans were so sure that, this is going to happen for Brady Quinn. This is going to happen for Jimmy
Clausen.
And actually, I think it was just those two, because then Charlie Weiss got fired. But they also had Demetrius Jones was the running quarterback that Charlie Weiss signed, and I think 2007 he started against Georgia Tech, thinking he was going to be so super smart and run Demetrius Johnson, and of course it didn't work. And I think that was a 33-0 game or 33-3 game, and Charlie Weiss realized that wasn't as smart as he thought he was, or at least not when it came to college football. But those are some good times. Any of these other names on here stand out to you? One stood out to me is Mike Hohensee at Minnesota, because as I mentioned to you, I think in our email or DMs, he was the Bears quarterback during the 87 strike, and he was pretty good. And I remember writing on, I think either my math book or my social studies book, the brown paper bag book covers. And again, like Mike Hohensee and his number, and I had SOS, stay on strike. And because the Bears were doing pretty good, and I was happy with the way things were going. But he did pretty good. John Elway's on here as well. But Baker Mayfield is one of the best. The 2017 game, he had Ohio State. I mean, the entire offense, the Buckeye defense basically was a yo-yo to him, and he had complete control, and he was walking the dog, and he was shooting the moon, and just lit them up. The Taj Boyd on here, 2013, the 2014 game, that was a product of let's not defend Sammy Watkins, basically.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off. The one thing that I liked was 2 of these games were back-to-back weeks. That's the real thing, the real joy. 2, they gave up 516 yards to Scott Campbell on Halloween in 1981, and then the next Saturday gave up 444 yards to Hohensee in Minnesota. So that's I can do math. 960 yards in 2 weeks, and they went 1-1 in those 2 weeks. That was a 45-33 win over Purdue and a 35-31 loss to Minnesota. And I would ask if you could possibly imagine an Ohio State defense getting torched that badly in 2 back-to-back weeks, but you all remember last year.
I want to go through here and see who are the starters in 1981 for that defense. Because that is
one of those years in the early 80s was the one year that Nick Saban was on staff as a defensive backs coach.
Probably what got him fired.
I think that was 1983, but they were just putrid on defense that year too. And so Nick Saban was at Ohio State one year and just basically got lit on fire, and then that was it. And whatever happened to that guy.
Yeah, we all know it's easier to win in the SEC than it is in the Big Ten. We saw. I mean, he struggled at Michigan State, and finally only found success at LSU and Alabama as lesser programs in a lesser conference. 1981 defense. Okay, I got it right here. Let's see. What kind of secondary? Oh, gosh. Wow. Sean Gale, Garcia Lane, Kelvin Bell, actual good players. Maybe there's no pass rush. Let's blame it on that. Wow.
And 2 weeks after they gave up, the last of their 960 yards in back-to-back weeks, they held Michigan to 9 points and won against number 7 Michigan in Ann Arbor.
Yeah. Well, look at here, Sean Gale and Garcia, they were sophomores that year, so it's understandable that they get lit up a little bit and then grow from there. Talking about Michigan quarterbacks, we can go ahead and move to the future of the Michigan quarterbacks. JJ McCarthy, 5-star 2021 quarterback, committed to Michigan. Was it this past week?
Yeah, it was just a couple days ago.
He's the number 2 pocket passer in the nation. I think number maybe 19 player overall in the 24/7 composite. Ohio State has a commitment from Kyle McCord, the number 8 quarterback in the 2021 class. And I always like to follow these players at the same position. We usually see with running backs at Ohio State and Michigan, where they have offers from both places, and then they make their decisions on where they go, and you follow them from there. I'm pretty sure McCord had an offer from Michigan. I know McCarthy had an offer from Ohio State. It seemed like Ryan Day latched on to McCord pretty quickly, and I don't know if that was a product of McCord being more receptive to committing sooner, although McCarthy ended up committing pretty quickly as well. But Tom, I'm trying to think of other quarterbacks where they have offers from both schools in the same class, and really I off the top of my head because I'm not going to do research, but I couldn't think of too many because Ohio State, they recruited different types of quarterbacks for the most part since, 2004, 2003, 2000, since then. I don't, Devin Gardner didn't have an OSU offer.
Did I do the homework? Is that your question? Yes.
I know you did, so that's why I don't have to ask it.
Yes, I did the homework.
Give me something.
The last one that I could come up with that was like a true head-to-head quarterback battle was Terrell Pryor. And that was 2008 recruiting class. Since then, last year, 2018, Ohio State signed Matthew Baldwin, Michigan signed Joe Milton. And neither of them had offers from the other school. Tate Martell and Dylan McCaffrey the year before that, neither of them had offers from the same school, or from the other school. Year before that, Dwayne Haskins and Brandon Peters. Year before that, Joe Burrow and Alex Malzahn and Zach Gentry. Year before that, Stephen Collier and Wilton Spate. Year before that, J.T. Barrett and Shane Morris. Year before that, Cardale Jones and Michigan didn't sign one. 2011, it was Braxton Miller and Russell Bellamy. 2010, Taylor Graham and Devin Gardner. 2009, Kenny Guyton and Tate Forcier and Denard Robinson. So that's going back that far. I went back and looked at each of the Michigan quarterbacks. None of them were listed as having OSU offers on 247. And then once you get back to 2010, Devin Gardner doesn't have offers listed anymore because that's too long ago before they had an active database. But yeah, my recollection as well was that Devin Gardner, he grew up an Ohio State fan, if I remember correctly, and did not get an Ohio State offer and ended up going to Michigan, which I couldn't remember who did Ohio State miss out on in 2010 because I'm sure they didn't pick Taylor Graham over
Taj Boyd.
Was that Taj Boyd? Okay, so they were holding out for Taj Boyd. Okay,
the Devin Gardner, Robert Bolden was also a Michigan. He was from Michigan, but Devin Gardner, he had a letter from Ohio State and he burned it and then put it on. I guess it would have been Twitter at that point or Facebook or something. Where maybe MySpace, who knows? But I recall a letter from Ohio State. It wasn't an offer, but once you burn a letter and share it with people, don't expect to get an offer from that school.
Are you thinking of Juwan Bishel-Beatty? Because there was an offensive lineman who did that.
He did that as well, but I'm pretty sure
he did that
Gardner,
as well. Okay, I didn't remember that.
But if you want to talk, I can Google.
The one thing that I thought was interesting, I was going back year by year and going, okay, so which of these quarterbacks, I just went down the list, which of these quarterbacks, how many years in a row would you have taken the guy Ohio State took over the guy that Michigan took? So 2009, Kenny Guyton versus Tate Forcier and Denard Robinson. I mean, Denard Robinson probably had the best career of any of those guys. Kenny Guyton worked out just fine for Ohio State, but Taylor Graham versus Devin Gardner, I'm going to go ahead and give that one to Michigan. Braxton Miller versus Russell Bellamy. I'm going to give that one to Ohio State. Cardale Jones versus no one. I'm going to give that one to Ohio State. J.T. Barrett versus Shane Morris. I'm going to give that one to Ohio State. And
5-star Shane Morris.
Yeah, exactly. So you went Braxton Miller, Cardale Jones, J.T. Barrett against Russell Bellamy, who transferred to, I think, UT San Antonio, no one, and Shane Morris, who transferred to Central Michigan. That right there is basically the start of the Urban Meyer era and how he got rolling and just completely dominated Michigan. Those 3 years right there. And after that, Stephen Collier versus Wilton Spate. Collier obviously didn't pan out, but that was almost kind of a placeholder thing. Joe Burrow versus Alex Malzahn and Zach Gentry. I mean, Burrow didn't do it at Ohio State, but he clearly was a better prospect. Dwayne Haskins versus Brandon Peters. Probably don't need to spell that one out for you. So, I mean, really, until you get to 2017, Tate Martell and Dylan McCaffrey, in 2018, Matthew Baldwin and Joe Milton, there's not really a year where it's particularly close even. And, Dylan McCaffrey and Joe Milton haven't actually done anything for Michigan yet. They're both people that they hold in pretty high esteem right now. I think there's a lot of promise with both of those guys and a lot of potential, but right now they haven't gotten anything, but I guess you'd have to give them the advantage since they're actually still on campus at the school where they recruited.
And Joe Milton and Dylan McCaffrey will compete to be the backup to Shea Patterson this year. But would you be shocked if one of them is somewhere else next year? When they don't win the job out of the spring and, they transfer. And so it's just looking at the quarterback recruiting for Michigan of late and how many, like, not even necessarily the recruiting, because it's not been recruiting that has put Michigan quarterbacks on the field. It's been transfers. Wilton Speight was the most recently recruited Michigan quarterback to start, really, because Harbaugh got there and it was immediately Jake Rudock, and now we know it's Shea Patterson. So, next year, 2020, I assume they will finally be starting a homegrown guy, but it will be interesting to see if they can keep everyone they have, including they signed a pretty good 2019 guy, I think, as well. And then obviously they'll be getting guys each year from there. That takes us to another Michigan 2021 commit, offensive lineman Giovanni El Hadi, who was talking about JJ McCarthy in an interview and basically said he's not going to be touched by defenses and he'll be protected, and he's looking forward to us protecting him, and nobody's going to get to him. To which Jack Sawyer, Ohio State 5-star 2021 defensive end, quote tweeted that and said something like, oh really, or we'll see. Was it we'll see? Something like that, Tom?
Yeah, it was something like that.
And I love it, but you always have to be careful that you're not on the Kyle Kalis side of history when it comes to talking about the rivalry before you play in it. Now, I love the sooner people want to start talking about the rivalry, go for it, because I love it. It's my favorite thing in all of sports, Ohio State and Michigan. So I don't make them 8 years old playing in Pee Wee, talking trash about the other schools. I'm fine with that. I want them hating each other as quickly as possible and telling us about it. Tell us more about how much you hate Ohio State, how much you hate Michigan. Give it to me. But just be careful that you don't end up on the blood on the field side of things that Kyle Kalis ended up on, and just make sure you do everything in your power to back up your words and not have your words crammed down your throat.
Yeah, exactly. There's not that much upside for you to do this, but it's fun, and there is a decent amount of downside because no one remembers the guys who didn't guarantee a win. Everyone remembers the guy who guaranteed a win and then lost 62-39. So don't be that guy. This is I mean, a little less specific than Karan Higdon guaranteeing a win in a particular game, but it's as long as you can back it up on the field, that's fine. But yeah, you mentioned Kyle Kalis. We mentioned Juwan Bushell-Beatty earlier, lighting a Ohio State recruiting letter on fire and then never beating Ohio State in his career and really not kind of panning out. Joey Velasquez this year, who was a Ohio State baseball commit, who then Michigan offered him as a football player, so he's going to Michigan instead. And he said something about, this will be the last pair of gold pants they get or something like that. And it's like, that's fine. You want to say that, that's fine. But be prepared to back it up on the field. And, and you're going to also, if you're saying it, you're going to get blowback. You are opening yourself up for people getting angry at you. And I am extremely on the don't tweet the recruits train and leave the high school kids alone. But
what if they started?
Yeah, exactly. Well, you are kind of opening yourself up for it at that point. So, I am not tweeting at Joey Velasquez or at Jack Sawyer or anything like that. But if people want to do it, I get it. It's you're kind of opening yourself up for it if you if you're the groundhog who's popping his head up out of the hole. That's that's when you get that's when people start taking shots at you. So that's recognize that that's what's going on, and just be prepared to back it up on the field. But yeah, in general, yep, absolutely. The more hostility and trash talk you can have, the better.
Especially, my dream is to have all kinds of trash talk from like a 2021 kid who then eventually switches his commitment to the other school. And now you've got like somebody talking trash about Ohio State, and then he's like, you know what, I think I want to be a Buckeye. And now you've got to deal with all of that. And that makes it fun for years. And, talking about the recruit, then talking to him once he signs, and then talking to him in November when they play Michigan. It's great. It's like boring Redux all over again. Julian Fleming, let's go to, while we're talking about recruiting, 5-star Pennsylvania wide receiver Julian Fleming, the number 1 receiver in the 2020 class. I think the number 6 player overall. Released his top 5, his final top 5, and has set a commitment date for May 31st. And right now, Tom, the crystal balls are rolling in for Ohio State. I checked earlier, it was the Buckeyes had 61% of the crystal balls. Penn State had 39%. And I think that maybe like the last 8 predictions have come in the last couple of days for Ohio State, including a Clemson recruiting writer, including the president of 24/7 himself, Shannon Terry. So it looks like if nothing else happens from here on out, Julian Fleming will commit to Ohio State on May 31st. And when you combine him, if you combine him with G. Scott and Jackson Smith and Jigba, and I'm sure they'd like to take another, but if you just get those 3 guys, you are doing very well. Julian Fleming is, when I watch him, I see Michael Thomas. He's, like 6'3", 210 pounds, something like that. Very similar to G. Scott, 2 big guys who are ahead of the curve in terms of playing against high schoolers. Julian Fleming last season had like 1,500 yards receiving, 22 touchdowns, I think. But if you watch his huddle, his film, he's definitely not just a possession guy. He can take a catch over the middle and turn it upfield and go. And he is he's good. He's been to Ohio State many times, and credit Ryan Day, credit Brian Hartline, credit a passing offense that receivers want to play in, and maybe Jack Miller as well, a quarterback. I'm sure he's doing some stuff, but I think a lot of people are going to chalk this one up to Brian Hartline.
And I think that's probably fair, because Brian Hartline, between his NFL experience, between the production that you saw out of his guys last year, his youth, his energy, everything about Brian Hartline sort of screams, this guy should be a fantastic recruiter. And you're seeing it on the recruiting trail pretty much every day. There have been positions where Ohio State's class has been a little behind where the last couple of years are, and we've talked about all the reasons why that would be. It's just, this is kind of a transition year. Guys are going to kind of take a year to, take a little time to evaluate things, all that kind of stuff. So you're gonna take a little step back from the completely unprecedented recruiting levels of Urban Meyer. If they do add Julian Fleming to this class, then the wide receiver unit, that looks exactly like an Urban Meyer recruiting class. Like, that's one spot where you have not seen any kind of a step back. It would be a monster pickup for them if they could get him for a couple different reasons. Number one, just in terms of momentum on the recruiting trail, and you're sort of building the narrative, because a lot of recruiting seems like it sort of swings on narratives and who's the hot school right now, and oh, look, everyone's going to Clemson, and oh, look, Georgia's getting all these guys and all that. And if you can pick up a Julian Fleming, and you can potentially maybe keep a Paris Johnson, and you add another couple skill guys, or a couple, kind of 4 or 5-star prospects who these guys are out meeting with at all these all-star games, and that can make a big difference. Just the relationships between players and friendships between players can help swing guys to your school as well. So if you have some of those kind of highly ranked guys, those guys can kind of be magnets and help draw in other top recruits as well. So it's big from that end if they end up getting him. But also, just positionally, they're kind of loaded at X. And I don't know, at Z, I'm sorry. They have brought in a number of guys at that kind of Z position recently, whether it's Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, those kind of guys. They have not brought in as many of the kind of bigger bodied guys who might slot in more at X. And I don't know where you see him. But he's basically the same size as Austin Mack right now. He's like 10 pounds lighter than Austin Mack. But I could see him very easily slotting in at X. And they lose Austin Mack after this year. They lose Ben Victor after this year. So that's a spot where there is going to be playing time available. And, they have other guys there, Jalen Harris and guys like that. But there is an opportunity for a 2020 wide receiver to get on the field as a freshman playing X. And so just positionally for the wide receiver unit, that would be a big place to have another body as well.
Yeah, and we didn't even mention Jameson Williams when talking about the Z's. Every time you watch his film, every time I watch his film, I don't like to say the words Teddy Ginn, but that's what it looks like. That's what the speed difference looks like compared to who he's playing against. I don't know whether that happens this year in terms of Jameson Williams playing, but I think people should not forget him and just keep an eye on that guy. Julian Fleming, yeah, I see him X. I see him G. Scott X. And really, you think about the 2020, Jalen Harris, maybe Elijah Gardner can do that as well, but Jalen Harris would be the guy as a senior. And really, we need to see something from him this year to make that position not a concern next year, because you don't want to have to rely on a freshman. Look at the way they're treating Z this year, where Garrett Wilson was outstanding in the spring, but they still don't want to make him a number 2. They're comfortable with him at number 3 right now. So next year they probably will have to have a freshman as the number 2X just because of like you said, the body types. Do you have anything else on the receivers or anything before I get into this Fox thing?
No, let's talk TV.
Yeah, this is just interesting to me. But the Fox TV upfronts, the TV upfronts are where networks get together. Networks sell their shows, show their shows, and what's coming up for the next season to ad buyers and things of that nature. And Fox this week said that their major game that they want each week, they plan to put it at noon. And that works great for Ohio State, Michigan, and the ratings are always high for that. I think it was the highest rated regular season game last year. I like this idea, Tom, where you have Fox's biggest game at noon, because then you also have a big ABC game at 3:30. You have a big CBS game at 3:30 generally, but then you also have a big ABC ESPN game at 8. So assuming the schedule has big games, you should, not that we get to watch any of it. Well, we will twice this year because of the 2 awesome bye weeks. Thank you, calendar gods. But to have the biggest game on one network at noon, the biggest game on another network at 3:30, the biggest game on another network at 8, what more can you ask for? You've got Fox, you've got ABC and ESPN, and with all of these 8 p.m. games, when, like 12 years ago, it would be big. It was a big game if like ABC or CBS had an 8 p.m. game, and you looked forward to that. And now we get that every week with 3 networks, not even including ESPN2 or FS1. And I like this idea.
Yeah, I'm all for spreading out the content. Like, don't put all of the good games on at the same time. There were weeks last year where the 3 most compelling games were all on at the same time. It was like ABC's got a really good game, and Fox has a good primetime game, and there's a really good game on ESPN, and they're all on at the same time, and I don't have 3 televisions sitting next to each other, which, I don't know, maybe that's a personal failing on my part.
That's your fault.
It seems like it makes a lot more sense to spread things out and be the most desirable game in your time slot. just I don't want to get too deep. My background is in TV, and I'm not going to get too deep into TV nitty gritty here. But in general, primetime, nighttime games are considered the most desirable because you have the most people theoretically sitting at home on a Saturday night watching. That's where your ad rates are generally the highest, where your ratings are generally the highest. And so that's where people have always kind of put those primetime games. But that doesn't really work as well if you're really segmenting the audience at night. And at this point, ESPN and ABC have kind of staked their claim on that slot, and CBS has the 3:30 the 3:30 CBS slot for the premier SEC game. That's basically their slot. So noon is where you go. And for Fox is mostly Big 10 and Big 12. So, these are not games that are going to be starting at 9 a.m. Pacific time for, like Pac-12 games or anything. So Ohio State, Michigan being a noon game is normal. Texas, Oklahoma kicking off at noon, that's normal. Like that is the normal kick time for a lot of those games. So this is not going to be a huge adjustment for people. And it makes a lot of sense because you think about what is normally on in those noon slots. There's usually a lot of really crappy, like that's when you end up watching a bunch of, Iowa versus Tulsa kind of games, or you watch a lot of Northwestern Minnesota at noon. And it's like, yeah, but what if there was something better on than Northwestern Minnesota? Like a whole lot of people would probably watch that. So this is something that's worth exploring because it's not something that people have done for quite a while. And it's an opportunity to potentially kind of stake your claim, make that your spot, and have a big audience in a spot where you wouldn't normally have one.
And keep in mind, Fox is also starting their pregame show this season. I think it starts maybe at 11 o'clock with Reggie Bush, Matt Leinart, and Urban Meyer. So they're going to want to start the college football Saturday. Start with our pregame show. And while you're here, now you've got the 12 p.m. game. Or since you're coming here for the 12 p.m. game, why not get here at 11 and check us out? Although, Tom, looking at the week 1 schedule, it's pretty pitiful, and I don't even know what that 12 p.m. Fox game would be. At this point, it would probably be like Florida Atlantic at Ohio State or Middle Tennessee at Michigan. And really, there's a bunch of crap, and that's another reason why having your top game at noon isn't such a bad idea, because the weeks where it's Indiana at Ohio State at 8 p.m., really that's your top game. Having it at noon, you can kind of sneak it in there. Yes, this is not a great game, but it's noon. You're not expecting a great game. This is what you're conditioned to. Whereas a primetime network game, and it's not a good game, you're like, why am I watching this crap? And then you go and you look for something else. So at least at noon, you're accustomed to watching crap. At 8 p.m., I want to be watching good stuff. I don't want to be watching crap. But week 2, Tom, now we got some stuff. Although I still don't know what that Fox noon game would be, because you've got I think it would be Army at Michigan, as opposed to Cincinnati and Ohio State, because there's a lot of talk that Army could be 12-0 this year. They could run the table, and this would be their. It's just an interesting competition between those two. Sometimes I look at these schedules and I just I want the summer to go by, but that's stupid and that's wrong. Because the sooner fall gets here, the sooner winter gets here, and it's just all a crap show.
Yeah, that's what you want to be doing. You want to be shoveling snow in 8 weeks. I don't think you've thought this one all the way through.
I have not. I definitely have not. Real quick, so people understand, I know a lot of fans don't like noon games, but allow me and Tom to explain to you that you are wrong. Noon games are the best games. For one, generally, if we try, can be home by 8 to watch another game, or two even, which is great. These 8 p.m. games, they're not good for anybody. For one, people drink too much, and you shouldn't drink too much. You go ahead, but and you get belligerent, and that's not good for your family. But also, these 8 p.m. games on the road, when we get back to the hotel at 4 a.m, suck. And so that's why noon games are good. They're better. And I think people need to realize that when they're so concerned about how it affects them, that's selfish. Think about how it affects us.
And if you don't care about how it affects us, although it really does affect us, those are really not that, it's really not that fun to cover a night game at Rutgers and then get back to a hotel at 4 a.m. and then have to drive back from New Jersey on Sunday, all sleep deprived. But I mean, after the joy of watching the cannon fire in person, I guess it's all worth it. But I mean, I know people don't like noon kickoffs at home because you don't have time to tailgate, and it's just the atmosphere is not what it normally is, and the students are not really there at the beginning of the game. The thing that makes 3:30, everyone loves 3:30 games. The problem with 3:30 games is if you go to a 3:30 game, you miss the second half of the noon games, and then by the time you get home, you've missed the first half of the night games. So you're basically seeing the first half of the crappy noon games, and then the last half of the primetime games, and that's it. So you basically have missed almost an entire day of football other than the one game that you've watched. With the noon game, you're home, you see the second half of the 3:30 games, which is, that's generally the most important half of the game, and then you're there, you get to see the whole primetime game. So that's, to me, I've actually, even when, before I was covering the team, during years when I wasn't covering the team, I still kind of preferred those noon games when I was going, because otherwise you miss basically the whole day if you're going to a 3:30 game and you're tailgating and all of that. And you can kind of keep an eye on things if someone has a satellite dish at your tailgate or whatever, but that's not the same thing as actually being able to sit down and watch. And if you're like a real college football fan, not just a one-team college football fan, then I think it's almost unquestionable that those noon games give you a better chance to see the whole schedule.
And the reason that a lot of these noon games, the environment is not great isn't because of the opponent. It's not because of the time. It's because of the opponent. It's Florida Atlantic. It's Florida A&M. It's Florida State. All these terrible Florida teams, or Tulsa, or whomever. It's the opponent and not necessarily the kickoff time. So thank you for listening to us whine about having to cover noon games, night games, all of that. We do appreciate your patience. Tom, let's go to just the one listener question about the initials. Let's do that, and then let's call it a day.
All right. This one from AZN8. Who are the greatest Ohio State players who go by initials? For example, A.J. Hawk, K.J. Hill, J.T. Barrett, J.K. Dobbins, A.J. Trapasso. Now,
Tom, I know you told me you went through and looked at all of the All-Americans and letter winners, or maybe not letter winners, but I went through and looked at, I think I did all of the letter winners, or actually, no, I did all of the jersey numbers. So from 1 to 99, looking for a whole bunch of initials so I could put together an entire team of initial guys, but you really can't. The defensive line, very light on the defensive line, when the only defensive lineman that I could find was JT Moore, and he has to play all four positions on the defensive line. So we're not going to be a great defense.
One guy playing all four positions, that's kind of like some of Michigan's recent defensive lines.
That it's very much so, Chase Winovich. So there's for me, I think it's just three, right? It's JT, it's J.K. Dobbins, and it's A.J. Hawk. And while I think A.J. Hawk is one of the best of all time, and I think he's better than JT. JT has more records, more accolades, but he also was the beneficiary of playing in an offense under Urban Meyer when the Ohio State offenses of the past weren't necessarily up-tempo and prolific. So if A.J. Hawk could have played in a prolific Ohio State defense, I think he would have done better. So even though JT has all of the records, has the silver footballs, I think 2, players of the year, I'm going to go with A.J. Hawk, and I know that might be wrong in terms of the best of all time.
it's just so hard to say because you don't know how A.J. Hawk would have done as an Urban Meyer quarterback. Would he have done better than J.T. Barrett? I don't know. It's hard to compare.
Yes.
A.J. Hawk was the only player to be an All-American with initials as an Ohio State player. So I think he has to be at the top of the list. 2-time All-American. J.T. Barrett, 3-time All-Conference. That is the most All-Conference honors as a player going by his initials. The other ones who were All-Conference, T.J. Downing, offensive lineman in the mid-2000s. B.J. Sander, the punter in the early 2000s. And the only other guy to be a captain, C.J. Barnett. So that's those are guys who at least are in the conversation. But yeah, I mean, KJ Hill this year is probably going to be a captain, potentially going to set some pretty significant Ohio State records. J.K. Dobbins, we talked about him last week, where he could end up. Could pass Ezekiel Elliott with about a 1,500-yard season this year. He's got to be in that conversation. Can you think of any like tight ends from the early 2000s who you think would be in that conversation?
You've got DJ Jones, who was in the 90s, but maybe a tight end who then had to transition to offensive line, like R.J. Coleman. Had a few years at tight end and then had to go to guard, but now we don't need to put him in there. You mentioned T.J. Downing, J.B. Shugarts. I would probably he's the only tackle that I could find. Here's something for you. Here's my linebackers, and this is admittedly it's cheating. So I've got AJ Hawk, C. Grant, and let me finish, and Obi Stillwell.
That's pretty good. I could respect that. That's okay. I mean, and they had Dane Sanzenbacher listed as D. Sanzenbacher, and I think that was just due to space. But if you want to count him, I'll allow it.
You got KJ Hill, you got CJ Saunders as my receivers. Defensive backs. My corners were EJ Underwood and BJ Berry, who never really got to play. EJ Underwood he could have been really good, but I don't think he was ever. Didn't really buy into the whole college football thing. Really not a lot of other guys. Casey Christian, walk-on running back. AJ Alexander. Here's one for you. T.Y. Williams, who was also Ty Williams, but was also T.Y. Williams, who was 6'7" and freakish athlete, but school wasn't his thing. There's really... I think we've covered the interesting thing of all of these. You've got AJ Trapasso, who would be the second best punter to go by his initials, because we all know that's BJ Sander. Who didn't he win the Right Guy Award the year after? He did. Andy Groom should have.
Yes, I believe he's pictures up on the wall at the WAC. And AJ Trapasso. What did he do? He did something in the NFL. He had a fake punt for a touchdown or something in one of the... he had a fake punt for a touchdown in the Hall of Fame game, and he was also the one who hit the scoreboard at Dallas Cowboys Stadium with the punt. Yeah, so I don't know if he had a very long pro career, but he had a memorable pro career.
Now, I want to play this game because I'm looking at all of these names. I'm going to give you 3 names, one at a time, and I'll give you over under 5 years. Like, I'll give you a range of 5 years of when these guys played, okay? So the first one is Merle Went, W-E-N-D-T. Just give me the year you think he played, and if you're within 5 either way, we'll give you a point.
Merle Went. I'm going to guess it was before 2017. I'm going to guess there has not been a Merle in college football since 1942.
So do you think this Merle was the last one? So you're saying 1942.
I'm going to say 1942, yes.
He played from 34 to 36, so you're just outside of that edge. All right. Now here's another one. Emil Slovak. E-M-I-L, Emil Slovak, S-L-O-V-A-K.
That feels like someone who probably played in the 60s or early 70s. So I'll say 1967.
1943. Only played 1 year, probably went pro or to the war.
That's probably that's probably why I don't remember him. He didn't have a long career.
All right, here's the last one, and then we'll call it a day because you're not very good at this game. I thought you would be better. It's a very simple game where you just guess the year the guy played based on the name his name.
Can you give me like Justin Zwick or something? I could probably nail that one.
I can almost do those initials for you. Ready? Gust, G-U-S-T. Let me finish, Tom. Gust Zarnas. Wait, no. Yes. Gust Zarnas. Z-A-R-N-A-S. Gust Zarnas.
Gust Zarnas.
Played for 3 years.
3 years.
So you've got a wide range that you could nail this.
So I should definitely remember this guy.
Gust.
Gust. 1924.
1935 to 1937. I am so sorry, Tom. We'll try this again next week.
This is really the Great Depression of Ohio State football. We are right in the heart of it, right there.
You know, in like June, we could do an entire show of this when there's nothing to talk about. I can just put a whole bunch of these names down, and we'll just guess them, and it'll be a good time.
We should make sure we don't ask for people to leave us reviews at the end of that show. Just make a note.
What we can block them at that point? Can we like close the reviews?
We may close the podcast at that point.
All right, so that's going to do it. We thank you all for listening. We always thank you for the ratings and the reviews. Make sure to check out everything we're writing at theozone.net. And you can follow Tom on Twitter at Tom Orr 4, the number, not the word, not either of the words, the number. You can follow me on Twitter at Tony Gerdeman. You can follow the show on Twitter at Buckeye Weekly, but I don't really tweet from there, so that should be incentive for me to tweet from there. And I know I should. I'm sorry. And I'm apologizing to Tom. I'm not apologizing to you guys because Tom's going to get on me. I know that. So thank you all for listening. Tom, you got anything else?
No, I think we are all set for the week, and we'll see you next week.
We will see you next week. Have a good night. Have a good day. Goodbye.
Well, she threw away the motel key. I wish it never meant nothing to me. Say you will, now say you will. Oh yeah. Say you will, now say you will. If you tell me that tomorrow's alright, we could steal a car.